Hey beautiful people, my name is Kristen. Thank you for taking some time stopping by my channel to hear about my book review and reflections on Winter Counts, a novel by David Heska, Wanbli, Weiden. So this story actually is 5-star for me. I will just go ahead and start from that. I think I would do a video review on books that I didn't find 5-star, but for the most part, any book I'm going to do a standalone video on has to be worthwhile, right? Has to be worth our time for a few minutes just to focus on it and tell you why you might want to consider reading it. So this story, the quick synopsis is, this will be spoiler free, and if I say anything that I think will be to give away, I will give you a warning to pause or skip it. But I believe all of this should be pretty spoiler free. The story overall is set on the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota, and it focuses a lot on the justice system, right? It talks a lot about what are the laws and the regulations and the police, the official police, and then technically an Indian reservation is not federally owned or governed, so that you kind of have like tribal self-police versus when the United States is involved. It's like this tricky kind of gray area. And so it was explaining like when a crime like murder or something really serious, capital embezzlement, things like that, then the federal government does have the authority and wants to come in, because it's technically their land. And the interesting thing, a little backstory, is, the settlers and the United States took lands away from the Native Americans and put them on these reservations and said, kind of, here's where you can be. And basically there has been court lawsuits or whatever that has validated the wrongdoings against the Native Americans, but they have not laid claims to those because the reality is they want their land and their culture. And I think a lot of times we have to come to that realization of different cultures because we only see the world through our own lens of how we've grown up. So for the Native American, it is much more, they don't own land, right? It is about being, about spirit, and driven by honor. So like even death itself is not, I think, as scary to a Native American. They would be more scared to die without honor than to die, if that makes sense. And it is a really beautiful, powerful culture that we are losing because they don't really have the adequate space or means to live out fully who they are, their full identity. And I think that's why there ends up being a lot of depression and alcoholism and even crime on these reservations. And so our, let me see if I can actually jot through. It's Virgil Wounded Horse is the main character. And so I always love Native American names too. But he is the local enforcer on the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota. When justice is denied by the American legal system or the tribal council, he is hired to deliver his own punishment, the kind that's hard to forget. But when heroin makes its way to the reservation and finds his nephew, his vigilantism suddenly becomes personal. He enlists the help of an ex-girlfriend and sets out to learn where the drugs are coming for and how to make them stop. So I will say, well-written thriller. It's that kind of intense trail, and you've got, you're never knowing exactly who you're dealing with because you've got the Native American council police, you've got the feds, you've got the unspoken system, and basically he goes around and beats up people who basically get away with anything short of flat out murder. So all of the assaults and rapes and high crimes, robberies, all that kind of stuff was really going unpunished in that area. So he just kind of takes it and brings some justice and value to that system. And his nephew, who he has lost his sister, so he feels almost like a father figure to this nephew. And he's a teenager and a little moody because everything is going on at this time. And so he also is wrestling like, is my nephew telling me the truth? What's really going on as far as this, particularly around drugs? And there's several different drugs, several different characters. You're trying to figure out, all of these ties, and they travel across state lines. They bring in all this information. It's a really fun ride. And what I really loved is that, having been to South Dakota and having actually stayed on the Rosebud Indian Reservation, when he would describe downtown or he was talking about things, it was accurate. I saw it in my mind. I could see these things happening. I'm sure, the time period that this is set in, it's not like super back in the day, but, it's a couple decades old, where the story takes place. So, it may or may not have been exact, but even when he's talking about Wounded Knee, which is where the most prevalent, horrific massacre of those people happened, I have been there and I've seen it, and I knew exactly, as he's talking about the hill, I've walked up that hill. It was just such a even more powerful, deep reading of it. But anybody who's walked up a hill or has been on Indian ground or has had dealings with being in a place that has had something sacred, particularly difficult sacred, happen, you know what I'm talking about, right? And so the way he would write that and paint that was just so amazing. And the only thing that I thought might be a little fictitious was the building that was at Wounded Knee that he has this kind of showdown at. I don't think it was the building, because he was talking about it even being like a museum for that. There's something there at Wounded Knee, but because it's so far out of the way on Pine Ridge, the actual museum is actually about 100 miles north on the main highway, where it can actually draw attention and get revenue and get tourists, because the only tourist thing you could possibly do on the Indian reservation is see the site of Wounded Knee, and there's not much there. If you don't know what you're looking at or know some of the story yourself or bring that along with you, you probably would miss it. You'd probably miss the significance of it. So all that to say, I don't want to give too much of the story away, but it was just where I pretty much read this in one sitting. I sat down, started reading it, and I did not want to put it down. It was just so good and engaging. I got so attached to several of the characters, really rooting for them, even if they were messed up and doing some bad choices and things that, kind of make you cringe a little. It's like you were still like, yes, you understood their heart and their passion, and you just wanted to know what was going to happen next. So if any of that sounds interesting, and I also love right here on the cover, see, there's the Tonka, which is the buffalo, which is basically, they don't believe that it is a deity or God, but it basically represents the Great Spirit, right? It's like the symbol of the Creator. And so it's just such a neat, almost a separate magic system, if you will, to delve into this kind of the powwows and the sweat lodges and all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't give you a lot of details on a lot of those things. So having been there and having done those and having studied some of that really did add to this book. So I would think that if you had a nonfiction book that was about Native Americans, particularly the Lakota people, which is the tribes that are on these reservations, that would be so good. I actually own 2 or 3. If I do, I'm going to think of which one that might be particularly good. I'll drop it down in the comment below. But that is my review of that. Highly recommend it. 5-star book. Think it's fantastic, and let me know what you think. I appreciate you stopping by. If you want more book reviews and book related videos, give me a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and I will see you again soon. Y'all take care.